what would be the next best thing? That was my question to myself. And so the next best thing is to get, if you want to use some type of sugar, that's the thing. I could do a whole lecture on, how sugar is processed and how harmful it ends up being to our body. And then the first question I get at the end of that is, so what kind of sugar can we eat? And so I realized, okay, I need to come up with the answer to that and find out. So the answer is, if you're going to consume sugar, and I believe that we all have, we have that natural desire for sugar, and we don't need to suppress that all the time. Obviously we need to reduce our sweet tooth and not be over consuming. But if we want to maybe do some baking or use a little bit of sugar in our food, what is the best type of sugar to use? And so the best type is one that's going to be high in nutrients, because that's what those nutrients are what help your body to utilize the sugar properly, and you don't get a blood sugar spike. In the same way that doesn't happen when you drink the juice. So how did they do it in these countries where they grow the sugar cane? And now those countries, it's like I started learning about these things, and I'm on, those countries, they got it going on. They know how to do this. Over here in the US, we just want the white stuff, and nobody's eating, this raw sugar. So, but this is what you typically find in some of the other countries. In in South America, you find something called panela, which is just their version of it's an organic, unrefined cane sugar. So what they do is they just take the juice, they squeeze it out of the sugar cane, and then they evaporate it over a low heat. There's no boiling that occurs, which is different when sugarcane juice is squeezed for mass production, and it's going to be eventually end up being white sugar. They boil it. They boil it to get rid of the water, and then it creates a really thick syrup, and then they separate out the crystals from the syrupy part, and then you end up with just white crystals at the end of that long process. But with a raw sugar, all that happens is an evaporation of the water off of that sugarcane juice, and you end up with a sugar that looks like this. It's very granular. It's not a uniform size crystal, because it hasn't really crystallized. It's just evaporated, and now you have a dry substance. You notice you can't see through it, like it's not a see-through kind of crystal. And it's got that dark brown color because that's all the minerals, that's all the vitamins that are still in it, and the polyphenols, so those antioxidants that are in there. And so you get the taste of this sugar is, in terms of its sweetness, it's just same sweetness as white sugar. But since it still retains all of its nutrients, it does tend to have kind of like a caramelly taste to it, more like that brown sugar flavor, only more earthy and natural. Like brown sugar still, what brown sugar is just white sugar. Like they actually just refined it all the way to be white, and then they add back some molasses onto it to give it that more rich flavor to it. But this type of sugar, there was nothing removed. So it still has all of those things in it. So you don't have to add molasses to it. It's still in there. So by the way, molasses is the byproduct of making white sugar, that boiling process. And then the crystallization, they separate the crystals away from the thick liquid that forms from the boiling, and that thick liquid is where all the nutrients are. And that's what molasses is. So molasses is that thick, very viscous, dark colored sweetener. And some people ask, what about molasses? Is that okay? And I say, it's not completely a whole food sweetener, but it's close, and it's certainly more nutritious than white sugar is. So yeah, you can, molasses it has specific uses because it's a very strong flavor. The raw sugar does not have that strong molasses flavor to it. It's more, like I said, caramelly a little bit. This one down here is called Sucanat, which is really just a trade name that means sugarcane natural, SUCANAT, so sugarcane natural. But it's basically the same thing. I had an interview with a grower in Costa Rica when I was writing my book, because I really wanted to know what's the difference between the sucanat and the, you know, raw sugar that I see like panela. And he said it's no different. It's just two different companies that are putting it in their packaging, but they get it from the same place. So I said, okay, all right, now I know. So here are, you know, a couple of other things to see. So you might see some different types of sugars on the market. There's something called muscovado, which is a sort of a dark color. You've probably seen these, the sugar in the raw packets, which if you open one of those packets up and you look at the sugar, it's actually a uniform crystal and it's got a clear kind of consistency to it. It's like you kind of can see through it, and it's not completely white, but it's also not as dark and granular as the raw sugar is. So it's been somewhat refined. So what happens is there's many steps that sugar goes through before it gets to be white. And so at each step along the way, they're removing more and more nutrients out of it. And then sometimes they'll throw some molasses back onto the crystals to make it a little darker colored, even though it's been more refined than the raw sugar has. And then this one too, like I mentioned earlier, evaporated cane sugar, you know, that sounds like, oh, it's just sugar cane juice that's been evaporated. That's what you would think. But when you look at it, you can see that that's not the case. That's just the name that they gave it, but it's still somewhat refined. It's got a very light color, and it's got, you know, a lot of the nutrients have been removed out of it. Some people say that it's really just 1 or 2 steps from being white sugar. You know, it really doesn't have much nutrients at all in it. And yeah, so here we go. So this is probably what that sugar in the raw packet looks like. So you can see it's a uniform type of crystal and it's sort of clear. So what happens is it's just more boiling, more separation of nutrients until it finally gets to be the white stuff. There's a really interesting analogy to this type of refinement, and you know, the same kind of thing happens to wheat when you know, you take a whole wheat kernel and then you separate off the outer part where all the bran is and all the fiber and all the minerals and vitamins, and you end up with white flour, which is, you know, very devoid of any of the original nutrients that were in the grain. So the analogy is that most pretty potent drugs, and especially like addictive drugs, go through a similar type of process. So if you have like a poppy plant, on its own, you know, poppy is pretty harmless. But if you start extracting and refining the most potent part of it to get it to be heroin and opium, then you have a drug. And, you know, so, you know, a lot of our drugs come from, you know, addictive drugs come from a natural source originally, but they just go through a refinement process. And that's why we say that sugar is like a drug, because to our body, that is what it is. It's like a drug. It doesn't really have any nutrients to it. If you've ever heard the term empty calories, that's what it means. It means that you're getting calories because there's sugar, but there's no nutrition. It doesn't have any vitamins, no minerals. And then when you get it in the body's going to try to utilize that sugar, you know, designed to use, our cells are designed to use sugar for energy. We're supposed to try to convert those glucose molecules into ATP, which is a form of energy. But we need B vitamins to do that. We need magnesium. We need iron. You know, there's like a lot of other little nutrients that are involved in the whole chemical process of doing that. And when you're eating just sugar without any of those other things, then you don't have the right tools basically to be able to do it. So it ends up